This is Closereads,
a philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. So we're going to start on a new unit here. We're back doing one of these little introductions before we get going. I guess the big reason I wanted to do this podcast is really there's an impossible... you think that the focus should be on short texts, but the things that really need close reading are these massive texts. Hegel's Phenomenology, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and this one, Sartre's Being and Nothingness. Heidegger's Being and Time is another one. But yeah, Being and Nothingness. And there's no way that we would ever be able to do this format for all 600 some pages. But I thought we'd take a stab at Part 1, The Problem of Nothingness, The Origin of Negation. So this is almost the beginning of the text. There is an introduction. Yeah, what are your... I know we've talked about parts of this text. I don't know if we've talked about this exact part. I don't recall if we had to read this exact chunk. What are your overall...
I don't remember if we read this, but I remember enjoying what we did read of Sartre and the transcendence of the ego, which we also did.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that at University of Texas as well. But I feel more comfortable with Sartre than some of these others. You know, I don't think he's as difficult as Hegel, for instance. But
nope.
And I see existentialism as kind of squarely within the neo-Kantian tradition with the emphasis on freedom. So it's kind of clear to me how it fits into the history of philosophy, which is not to say it's not, it's here also how Hegel and German idealists fit in relative to the early modern tradition. But yeah. So anyway, yeah, I'm quite comfortable with Sartre.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that, so Part 1, The Problem of Nothingness, has 2 chapters in it. The second which is Bad Faith. So I think that is when we did our original Sartre episode. Well, we did Transcendence of the Ego, you're right, first, because that was sort of the, I don't know, respectable. It was more clearly phenomenological. It was not, there was a lot of fun concepts to keep track of and pseudo-mathematical. His the closest he comes to being an analytic philosopher, where he's responding directly to Kant about the ego. And I know he had some other early things like The Imagination is a book that I'd love to read sometime. I read that partly on my own, where he's really engaging with Husserlian phenomenology. But I guess by this point he had become entranced with Heidegger, and sort of, well, we'll give my version of Heidegger. It's going to be maybe a little less radical in that he is, like Husserl, starting in the Cartesian. Let's use the point of view of the consciousness, the subject being conscious of a field of stuff in front of me and describing the appearances, whereas Heidegger had said such a standpoint doesn't make any sense. We have to instead talk about, more retrospectively about what the world was like when I was yesterday in my mode of average everydayness. Now, this weird philosophical standpoint can in fact sort of falsify the description of appearances, because you're putting yourself outside of a normal point of view. So I think Sartre has taken that under advisement, and he's not like Husserl talking about my perceptions of shapes and colors and things. He's not talking about basic stuff, these transcendental structures like the ego. He's talking about social things, but he is, there still seems something more to me recognizably phenomenological, and hence something I can identify with, something I can understand, something that I can, the whole point of phenomenology is put yourself in the shoes of the author, because they're just describing their appearances. Why don't you describe your own appearances? And if they don't match up, then something's gone wrong. Then maybe phenomenology isn't possible.
Right. Yeah, I think the focus on social phenomena as opposed to cognitive phenomena, if we want to put it that way, is much more interesting to me. And there's more room to be a literary talent, let's say, which Sartre is. So he's not just a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
He is, unlike Heidegger, a great writer. And um, some of the focus on social phenomena will make what he's doing closer to a novel sometimes, or a more straightforwardly literary project. And of course, he did have those as well. So, um, shall we? Should we jump in?
Sure. Here we are. It's chapter 1, The Origin of Negation. The question. Please proceed.
Our inquiry has led us to the heart of being. Oh no, I guess we started too late. We're already at the heart. But we have
That's
been
okay.
brought. This is what we get for skipping the introduction. Um, but we have been brought to an impasse since we have not been able to establish the connection between the two regions of being, which we have discovered. No doubt this is because we have chosen an unfortunate approach. Descartes found himself faced with an analogous problem when he had to deal with the relation between soul and body. He planned then to look for the solution on that level where the union of thinking substance and extended substance was actually effected with an E. That is, in the imagination. His advice is valuable. To be sure, our concern is not that of Descartes, and we do not conceive of imagination as he did. But what we can retain is the reminder that it is not profitable first to separate the two terms of a relation in order to try to join them together again later. Wow. Reminding me of Bradley now, which
Yep.
we just did. The relation is a synthesis. Consequently, the results of analysis cannot be covered over again by the moments of this synthesis. All right. The two
All right.
regions of being, is that matter and mind?
No. Uh, so I think it's the in itself and the for itself. Yeah, it is.
Well, that's matter and mind. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we'll see. We'll see a little more. We'll see whether this was an appropriate place to start. But I think. All right. M. Laporte. Let's name drop here. M. Laporte says that an abstraction is made
Anything else you
when
want to say
something.
about this first paragraph?
Uh,
Um,
no, I mean we don't understand it yet. His
um,
right. If we don't want to say that if the in itself and the for itself are both things that have come out of phenomenological analysis, then we don't want to say that they are simply ontologically fundamentally separate. We have to retain the fact that we gain them by analyzing the blooming, buzzing confusion that is human experience. And we pulled out something. I mean, if we're going to say that it is roughly equivalent to mind and matter, that there's certain things, for which its being is a question. There's consciousness that seems to have spontaneity and extend itself over all that it sees. I don't know,
all
versus an
right. So
in
just
itself that's merely its own nature. Yeah.
I'm just looking at, he sought the union of thinking so the mind body problem he tried to solve in the imagination. I'm a little unclear what he means by that. Um, but the upshot for Sartre is that we have to start with them joined together. We can't start with these two radically separate substances and then try to join them together or try to figure out how mind can arise from matter, from body. But I don't know how that's a lesson from Descartes. But anyway, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, no, I think you're right to point at this weird analysis of Descartes that says he's finding the link between mind and body in imagination. I mean, what is that other than I'm a philosopher? I'm trying to figure out a model for these things. I sort of picture the mind as a substance and picture the body as a substance, which already is maybe falsifying, right? Because substances are bodies are substances. I think Sartre is going to have a very different conception of consciousness such that you can't see it as spiritual substance. You've already violated the phenomenology when you put it in the substance box, because that's basically using the analogy of matter to try to think about, like, well, what could this thing that doesn't seem to be matter be? Well, it must be like a parallel type of thing. A thing, I guess, is it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is consciousness a thing? And I guess that is given by Descartes in that, yes, he starts with there are thoughts, there is a field of consciousness, there is the I think, but then because that gets us immediately to there must be a thinker that is doing the thinking, right? That's a point that is often, let's stop Descartes in his first track, that you really should just say there are thoughts. And I think that's what the phenomenologist is going to say, that there are thoughts and they are related to each other in a certain way. Heidegger characterizes it as mindness, right? They all, but for Kant, that it's, there must be some transcendental structure that unifies the various thoughts. So that's the transcendental ego. And then Sartre's transcendence of the ego is to say, well, that kind of theorizing about a transcendental ego should be off limits to phenomenology. You've left, all you can say is that there is something, just like we treat a book as a physical object in the world, that is transcendent of any particular perception of it. The ego is likewise a public physical object, not I don't know, physical, a social object, right? My character, my reputation, there are these tangible things that are more than any particular view of it, but it is fundamentally different than the thing that thinks. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think for this particular problem, the way that Descartes tries to solve the mind body problem, on the one hand, it involves interactionism with the pineal gland.
Mm-hmm.
On the other, it involves God ensuring that our representations of physical things are accurate. So we need God as a mediator, as we do, I think, for all of these guys, these early modern guys, in one way or another, or many of them. So anyway, yeah, let's read on.
M. Laporte says that an abstraction is made when something not capable of existing in isolation is thought of as in an isolated state. The concrete, by contrast, is a totality which can exist by itself alone. Husserl is of the same opinion. For him, red is an abstraction, because color cannot exist without form. On the other hand, a spatial temporal thing, with all its determinations, is an example of the concrete. From this point of view, consciousness is an abstraction, since it conceals within itself an ontological source in the region of the in itself. And conversely, the phenomenon is likewise an abstraction, since it must appear to consciousness. The concrete can be only the synthetic totality of which consciousness, like the phenomenon, constitutes only moments. The concrete is man within the world in that specific union of man with the world, which Heidegger, for example, calls being in the world. We deliberately begin with the abstract if we question experience, as Kant does, inquiring into the conditions of its possibility, or if we effect a phenomenological reduction like Husserl, who would reduce the world to the state of the noema correlate of consciousness. But we will no more succeed in restoring the concrete by the summation of organization of the elements which we have abstracted from it than Spinoza can reach substance by the infinite summation of its modes. A lot of packed in there.
So the overall idea is, and we've seen this in other existentialists that we've discussed on Closereads, the idea is that we don't want to start out with mind and matter as separate. We want to build into our ontology a layer in which subject and object are not distinct. And for these guys, it is the concrete man within the world. And then we can analyze out subject and object. But I think we should go back to the beginning of the paragraph as well and discuss that. So
Right.
the spatial, right? We start out with something that sounds like primary, secondary quality distinction. The spatio, the universal color and the spatiotemporal thing, which is supposed to be the concrete, the particular.
Yep.
Um, I kind of want to say that in a Trump voice for some reason, the particular. But so that and there are hints of Hegel in this, right? Consciousness is an abstraction, and it is the thing that supplies the abstraction, right? We might want to think that abstraction is always on the side of we might want to be a Platonist and say what we're calling abstractions are actually concrete particulars in a sense, they're Platonic forms, or we might want to say abstraction is entirely on the side of consciousness. It's just something that consciousness does with concrete particulars, which are spatiotemporal things. Um, so then consciousness itself becomes an abstraction. It's an abstracting, uh, although maybe that's not as clear an idea as maybe you should take that. Yeah. Consciousness being an abstraction. Is it
Yeah,
enough to say that it
that's what I don't
abstracts and
understand yet.
therefore it's an abstraction? Yeah.
It conceals within itself an ontological source in the region of the in itself. So this sounds like Kant, right? That there is a transcendental ego. There is something in the realm of the in itself, an actual thing that's back there. And what we are seeing as our minds and our mindness of our various contents of consciousness are abstractions from this fundamental thing, even though the thing is something that, at least according to Kant, we can never experience directly. We can only experience the fact that we are it, and we have to, we have to assume, for instance, that it is free. I believe he eventually says we have to assume that it's immortal. Uh,
Yeah.
Lots of weird stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does sound like conceals within itself an ontological source in the region of the in itself seems to mean that there is a concrete mental substance lying behind all the thinking. It's like a very Cartesian statement. I think, therefore I am, if that's what he means. Um, I suppose that, yeah, I don't know what else he could mean there, except that, yeah, that is what it sounds like.
I mean,
So,
maybe it's
yeah.
not in the intelligible world, as I was just saying, but that it is in the physical world, that we are a a a human organism, a particular human organism. That is actually the truth of our in itself. It's just, again, from the Cartesian point of view, when we abstract, when we're just sitting around as philosophers, it is hard to realize that it's actually, a discovery, like, oh, I'm not, there's no chance that I'm just a brain in the vat. I'm actually being in the world. I might have forgotten that as I'm doing my philosophy, but I am this concrete material thing. That's also a
So,
possibility.
yeah. Well, what's confusing to me is since, right, or because. So we're supposed to draw the conclusion that because there's an ontological source for consciousness, therefore consciousness is an abstraction. Um, I don't know why that's the case. Consciousness is an abstraction since it conceals.
Since it must
And
appear
then
to consciousness. Oh, yeah. Oh, since it's both since.
conversely, the phenomenon is an abstraction since it
Hmm.
must appear to consciousness, which right. So I think we kind of understand why phenomena might be abstractions. This is sort of the on the track of the myth of the given and
Sure.
phenomenology in general, and read, right, where what we conceive of as the object, what we're seeing, right, are three-dimensional objects, seeing, quote unquote, the intentional object, whereas we have to build that up perspectively, and we don't see all of it at once. So in that sense, yeah, anything that we might want to call an appearance is an abstraction in that sense.
Sure,
Uh,
sure. So yeah,
yeah.
I was characterizing this during our read discussion with Quine's idea that Physical objects are theoretical entities that we
Mhm.
essentially posit because we've seen all these appearances of them. But it's just, I think the paradoxical character of this is, Sartre is pointing out purposefully, that something that is concrete, you think that would be the thing that we can actually hold and perceive, and it is the thing that is closest to us. But actually, no, the concrete is something that we immediately think about. I'm again putting this sort of through Reed's idea.
Mhm.
When we have the perceptions, we're grasping in our minds, in our imagination. I don't know, but we're somehow grasping the object. We're thinking of it. It is the content of our consciousness, even though the thing that we are actually exposed to is a mere abstraction.
Yeah, or the thing that the right, the moments, as Sartre is calling them in
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. So the concrete can only be the synthetic totality of which consciousness, like the phenomenon, constitutes only moments. And this is very Kantian, by the
Mm.
way. And Kant does call this the imagination, right? The imagination collects the manifold pieces of the manifold and builds it up over time. And it has to, right? Memory is involved. You got to retain each perspectival moment, store it, and then collect all the new perspectives and then put them together and do a synthetic totality. You got to do a lot of work cognitively before you get, quote unquote, the concrete object. Um, but in this case, we don't want to start out by thinking for Sartre about in that Kantian way.
Mm-hmm.
Kant prioritizes the standpoint of consciousness, and then he's still dealing with a very Cartesian problem. Sartre wants to circumvent that problem, like a lot of these existentialists, by positing man as the fundamental concrete thing within the world. Again, it echoes of post-Kantianism, where the solution is to posit something that is more fundamental. It's like a monism, something more fundamental than mind and body, that mind and body fall out of, in a way, on two sides.
Yep.
Um, but calling that, right, in a way, the people like Schelling and Hegel want to call that ultimately God. That right, just like Spinoza, except they're doing their little twist on it. To call the it seems to me like the existentialist turn is to say the concrete is actually man himself. Although maybe if you generalize that, right, man as in human beings in general, maybe that is just equivalent to spirit and world spirit, which is God, right? One can make all these associations, but um, yeah, I don't know. What do you make of that?
I think the thing, right? He's explicitly bringing up Spinoza only as an analogy, um, but we are definitely, what we might think phenomenology is supposed to do is describe appearances, right? Which would be the abstractions here. And he's saying, well, that's the way Kant did phenomenology. That's the way Descartes did phenomenology. I'm doing a different kind of phenomenology that is informed by Husserl and Heidegger, which is I'm actually going to acknowledge that we, in our experience, grasp the transcendent. We grasp the whole.
Yeah,
And so that is what is fundamental in our analysis. And then we can talk about, as you've been saying, the moments of this grasping as the abstractions, but it's really the whole process.
yeah, and again, these will often be social phenomena as well.
Yep.
Um, so that we do these, what will end up being psycho social criticism, right? So with the waiter, the concept of character, for instance, becomes a subject of exploration. All right, is it my turn or your turn? It's
It's
my
my
turn.
turn. The relation of the
No, you
regions
did
of.
the.
Oh,
You
did I?
started.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Um, the relation of the regions of being in an original emergence is of an original emergence and is a part of the very structure of these beings.
You have frozen for me. Okay,
How
you were
about now?
frozen. You were frozen for a long time. You
Yeah,
got
it's weird because I have really good internet according to speed test. So
so I
it's
heard the
got to be
first
a
sentence.
processor thing. So
Yep.
okay. So yeah, and that's all I got to.
Oh, okay.
I stopped because so the relation of the regions of being is an original emergence and is a part of the very structure of these beings. And then I was puzzling over that. So the regions of being, which I take to be mind and body.
Well,
Um,
yeah. Let's just say even the in itself and the for itself. We might as well
sure. Okay.
go
All
with
right.
Sartre's, because this,
Okay.
yeah, mind
An
and body
original.
assumes that they are substances of,
Sure. Sure.
yeah.
Okay. An original emergence, and it's part of the very structure of these beings, of the very structure of which beings.
I mean, Dasein, the human being, we have an in itself, we have potentially multiple in
Mhm.
itself, right? We have the body, we have the character, the transcendental ego. Um, those are all in itself, but then the for itself is consciousness itself, which seems entirely spontaneous and free and not like a substance at all.
Well, I'm being very literal minded here because of Bradley, the influence of Bradley. And I see the word relation, which is like a word now that I have to associate with Bradley. So it's the relation that is the original emergence, right? Which is very helpful because we don't want to try to, we got to be holists here and we don't want to try to build the relation back into
Mm.
these, you know, two regions of being. The relation itself, right? Originally, there's a whole. And the relation is built into that. All right, I'll just continue. But we discovered this in our first observations. It is enough now to open our eyes and question ingeniously this totality, which is man in the world. It is by the description of this totality that we shall be able to reply to these two questions. What is the synthetic relation which we call being in the world? I like the fact that I'm a synthetic relation now as an entity. I feel like that's a promotion of some sort. What must man and the world be in order for a relation between them to be possible? In truth, the two questions are interdependent, and we cannot hope to reply to them separately. But each type of human conduct, being the conduct of man in the world, can release for us simultaneously man, the world, and the relation which unites them, only on the condition that we envisage these forms of conduct as realities objectively apprehensible and not as subjective affects which disclose themselves only in the face of reflection. Okay, more anti-Cartesian propaganda here.
Yeah, certainly we have to interpret this according to what he's just been saying in the previous two sentences, but I don't like the way he's putting this to that effect, because he's saying we have to recognize these separate things, man, the world, the relation between them, as having reality, objective reality, before we can then see how they fit together. Whereas I thought the whole point of having a single being in the world with hyphens between them is that is actually the fundamental entity. And so in keeping with the holism that he's just advised us, as we should say, the thing that we grasp is not man and then world and then the fact that they're related, but being in the world, man in the world, as a one thing. And then, yes, only in the face of reflection do they come apart into the separate things.
And then being in the world seems is it being identified with conduct and perhaps with therefore with character, right? Because conduct, the conduct of human beings in the world, right? Being in the world is like conduct in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that focusing on that, which explains the social focus of this sort of phenomenology, focusing on that can release for us simultaneously man the world. So we can analyze a okay and the relation which unites them. Um, Objectively apprehensible, not as subjective affects, which disclose themselves only in the face of reflection. So, um, right, we are engaged in reflection, And unless we're doing that, we as social phenomenologists are going to notice things that we don't normally notice on a day-to-day basis, and that we're not focused on that. We are in the social moment. Normally we aren't thinking fancy thoughts about the social moment. So
Right.
um but I think the idea is that for Husserl, we've bracketed out reality, and we're focusing on the phenomena as we experience it, and trying to build out a theory, right, of what reality is. And I think for Sartre, the reality is the thing to which we have a more direct, like as with Reed, this more direct access, and we shouldn't think of what we're doing as building out a theory from subjective phenomena. We should think of ourselves as having direct access to these social phenomena, and then
Right.
doing the analysis.
Yep.
All
We
right.
shall not limit ourselves to the study of a single pattern of conduct. We shall try, on the contrary, to describe several, and proceeding from one kind of conduct to another, attempt to penetrate into the profound meaning of the relation man-world. But first of all, we should choose a single pattern which can serve us as a guiding thread in our inquiry. Now, this inquiry furnishes us with the desired conduct. This man that I am, if I apprehend him such as he is at this moment in the world, I establish that he stands before being in an attitude of interrogation. At the very moment when I ask, is there any conduct which can reveal to me the relation of man with the world? I pose a question. This question I can consider objectively, for it matters a little whether the questioner is myself or the reader who reads my work and who is questioning along with me. But on the other hand, the question is not simply the objective totality of the words printed on this page. It is indifferent to the symbols which express it. In a word, it is a human attitude filled with meaning. What does this attitude reveal to us? I feel like there's been very little substance in these these two
Well,
mini
I
paragraphs
want to make
to
a note.
unpack, but go ahead.
Just this word interrogation, which becomes, such a staple for continental philosophers and literary theorists, and I really despise it. Um, because I think of interrogating, right, a suspect in a room, and that seems like a very disrespectful relationship to the world or to subjects of inquiry. And emphasizes the role of the interrogator as opposed to the being of the subject matter. But in any case, that's a minor point. The only worse word in my view is performativity, which is based on Judith Butler's misreading of speech acts. All right. So is there conduct, right? So yeah, we're going to focus on conduct.
Yep.
In a word, it is a human attitude filled with meaning. He's talking about the words. Okay.
So we're going to look at several types of
Signify.
conduct,
Yeah.
and a pattern. The first one is just this questioning that we're already doing. So we're going to start with the questioning attitude as being
Okay.
the conduct that we're going to look at.
Perfect.
And this is not unlike the beginning of actually this is very brisk compared to Heidegger's treatment in Being in Time of what is a question? Let's look at the ancient Greek words that go into and brings up this ancient Greek issue of, well, when you ask a question, you must already have some sense of the answer, so you know what you're looking for.
Causes and all
Right.
that.
We have a pre-ontological sense that allows us to do ontology, all this stuff.
Let's do a phone a friend. Aristotle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. In every question, we stand before a being, which we are questioning. Each question presupposes a being who questions and a being, sorry, I shouldn't be saying it that way, and a being which is questioned. This is not the original relation of man to being in itself, but rather it stands within the limitations of this relation and takes it for granted. On the other hand, this being which we question about something. That about which I question the being that about which I question the being participates in the transcendence of being. I question being about its ways of being, or about its being. From this point
Yep.
of view, the question is a kind of expectation. I expect a reply from the being questioned. That is, on the basis of a pre-interrogative familiarity with being. You like how I pronounce that pre-interrogative correctly on first try? Familiarity with being, I expect from this being a revelation of its being or of its way of being. The reply will be a yes or a no. It is
I
the
mean,
existence
that's pretty
of,
restrictive, but okay.
yeah. Answer the question. It's a yes or no. I just want to explain myself.
Nope.
Not allowed. This is an interrogation. It is the existence of these two equally objective and contradictory possibilities, which on principle distinguishes the question from affirmation or negation. There are questions which on the surface do not permit a negative reply, like, for example, the one which we put earlier. What does this attitude reveal to us? But actually, we see that it is always possible with questions of this type to reply nothing or nobody or never. Thus, at the moment when I ask, is there any conduct which can reveal to me the relation of man with the world? I admit on principle the possibility of a negative reply, such as no, such a conduct does not exist. This means that we admit to being faced with the transcendent fact of the non existence of such conduct. All right. Um, okay. We're questioning a being. Um, the relation between the questioner and the questioned is not of man to being in itself. So we're not thinking of ourselves as traditional scientists and subject interrogating object. Stands within the limits of the relation and takes it for granted. Um, I'm not. That's a little fuzzy. Um, except that it repeats what he's just said. That about which I question the being participates in the transcendence of being, which, is it the
Yeah, could we
intentional
have an
object
example,
or,
please?
yeah.
This is really quite abstract. So we're questioning, obviously, if you're questioning design, right? If you're questioning human nature, which it seems like this is what we're doing, then yeah, you might expect it to answer because it's a person, or it is a, if
And
not a
it's
person,
yourself.
yeah.
As much as we don't like Descartes, he's just sitting there by himself. Really, you're interrogating yourself. Um, so you answer yourself and then tell us. Um,
And even though
on
he
the
says it'll be a
basis,
yes or no, I think he then hedges that to say, well, it could be that an answer is forthcoming or an answer is not forthcoming, right? Because there
mm,
just objectively is no, the question was misconceived. There is nothing that fits the requirement that you've asked about. The empty set is going to be the answer. So a yes could be actually be something quite elaborate. Here, the being that you asked for is served up to you, showing itself as phenomenon. Here you go.
so it's the basis of the question is interrogative familiarity with being, which is a fancy way of acknowledging Meno's problem. We have to kind of know the thing that we don't know
Yep.
in the beginning, even to ask the question. Um, but this is really a pre interrogative familiarity with ourselves, I think. Um, it's a bit different than doing the I think, therefore I am routine that Descartes does, which is quite abstract because we can again think of ourselves as proceeding from a pre interrogative familiarity that is procedural or habitual, right? And therefore implicates character and is non-conscious, or dispositional. Um, right. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Um, and so we can inquire into conduct and character, and which is my reading of this. And find out that there is no conduct that is revelatory of our essence
Well, that's at
or of
least the
human
example
nature.
that he's giving. I think we could he's trying to make a general point about questioning. So he is doing exactly the thing that I said Heidegger did. And maybe he's going to be just as
Yeah.
laborious about it without the Greek words as Heidegger is. Uh,
I mean, as psychologists, we might want to say, "Hey, look at this particular type of conduct or behavior or habitual activity. That look at that, and that says something about human nature. This is the sort of thing that human beings do." Which we expect existentialists not to like those sorts of explanations because the focus is on freedom, existence, right, not essence. And um, this perhaps, I don't know that this paragraph is doing that, but perhaps it's preparing us for this idea that um, we can't analyze conduct psychologically in that way to reveal universal human truths. I don't know. But
well, I think where this is going is right. This is called the origin of negation. So we're trying to think of a way in which you legitimately could say there is a transcendent, right? He says that about which I question the being participates in the transcendence of being. So I just taught part of Being in Time before this, and he mentions actually he attributed to Aquinas, uh, where Aquinas is inquiring about various transcendences, including truth. So I think that whenever you say something has an essence or it's objectively true or it's showing itself as it is in itself, it has substantial being, you're saying that transcends this particular experience, this particular way of getting at it, this particular instance of questioning. Anything that is transcendent could be gotten at in any number of ways, right? Because it's a transcendent, really existing thing. Um, right. So the question is, can there be things in that realm of the transcendent that are non-things, that are the absence of a thing? Because that would be very weird if you were, I think you just brought up in our Bradley discussion, Augustine, and the idea of, whenever you inquire about the transcendent, wherever you posit something as real, and hence something that you could, use to give a reason for something else, or then you are referring to something positive. There are no privations that are real. All privations are merely a matter of sort of expectation of something that ends up not being there, or sort of cracks in the way that things fit together, the way that the interaction between the solid being of things and we mere mortals that are reflecting on that, these evils, these privations, these lacks appear. But Sartre, it looks like, is going to want to say that, well, given that my way of doing figuring out essence is going to be phenomenological, maybe negations can be real things.
Okay.
I think you're up, right?
It's your turn.
Oh, one will perhaps be tempted not to believe in the objective existence of a non-being. One will say that in this case, the fact simply refers me to my subjectivity. I would learn from the transcended being that the conduct sought is a pure fiction. But in the first place, to call this conduct a pure fiction is to disguise the negation without removing it. To be pure fiction is equivalent here to be only a fiction. Consequently, to destroy the reality of the negation is to cause the reality of the reply to disappear. This reply, in fact, is the very being which gives it to me, that is, reveals the negation to me. There exists then for the questioner the permanent objective possibility of a negative reply. In relation to this possibility, the questioner, by the very fact that he is questioning, posits himself as in a state of indetermination. He does not know whether the reply will be affirmative or negative. Thus, the question is a bridge set up between two non-beings: the non-being of knowing in man, the possibility of non-being, of being in transcended being. Finally, the question implies the existence of a truth. By the very question, the questioner affirms that he expects an objective reply such that we can say of it, it is thus and not otherwise. In a word, the truth, as differentiated from being, introduces a third non-being as determining the question, the non-being of limitation. This triple non-being conditions every question, and in particular the metaphysical question, which is our question.
All right. So confusing.
Yeah, the third one, the non-being of limitation. I'm not getting that.
Let's go back to the beginning. Well, it is worth keeping in mind that nothingness for Sartre is a synonym for consciousness.
Yeah, right. That's what we're going to get to. And I guess we could just sort of draw on our memory. I think it has something to do with our freedom, that we're not a mirror in itself. If we are a mirror in itself, then we would have substantial being. We would transcend any particular view of it. But since consciousness seemingly is spontaneous, can go in any direction that it so wishes, then its existence, its being in that second is just what it is in that second. Yeah.
But also consciousness is not an empirical object, observable empirical object.
Right. Right.
So it's a restatement of the mind body problem where subjectivity appears to be a nothingness from a hard science standpoint.
I mean, if we look back to the first paragraph here, could we say that then consciousness, this very mercurial changing thing, is the mere appearances of the substantial hidden transcendent that is within it, whether that again be a body with a brain or a transcendental ego or something like that? He's at least seems like he's playing with that if you really take the idea seriously that, all the reality is in the in itself and that anything else is just an appearance, then consciousness is not real in a certain way. It is a mere appearance. It is a negation. It is to say, I am not the substantial reality.
Right. So we want to say, non-beings can't have objective existence. So we relegate that to subjectivity. I learned from the transcendent being that the conduct sought is a pure fiction. The conduct sought seems to be thinking in a way, or subjectivity per se. I'm not sure.
I mean, I guess I again would still say the conduct thought. That's just his example here. So the conduct sought. So it is, if you're looking for something and it might not actually be there, then let's just say it's an X, and the X could be the empty set. Right?
Yeah, but the conduct sought isn't the conduct that we're talking about, the questioning itself, the interrogate, aren't we? In a way, interrogate.
I mean, it makes it pretty confusing if you use as your example the process that you're engaged in. Is that a needless confusion, or is that absolutely central to the purpose of what he's doing here? I'm not sure.
Destroy the reality of negation is to cause the reality of the reply to disappear. The reality of the reply is the subject. I mean, the object of interrogation is really subjectivity, thinking, questioning, interrogating, right? Okay. The negative reply, right? That's what we were prepared for, that there is no conduct.
Yep.
That what reveals
being in the world.
Yeah. He does not know whether the reply will be affirmative. The non-being of knowing is in man. Okay. Truth is differentiate. Okay, yeah, and then what is this limitation thing as a third non-being? Wait, what are the first two non-beings?
Well, it says the questioner, that there's a lack. I don't know the thing, so there's a non-being in me, and then the possibility that the thing that I'm questioning, it might just be the empty set, that the answer that I get is a permanent negative reply. Finally, the question implies the existence of a truth. By the very question, the questioner affirms that he expects an objective reply, such that we say to it, yeah. In a word, the truth, as differentiated from being, introduces a third non-being as determining the question, the non-being of limitation.
Right. Well, we know that Hegel thought of negation and limitation as related, right? The finite.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
There will be anytime there is an objective fact, it limits the sphere of possibilities. Like this, you've lopped off all things that would go against that objective fact. So yes, there will be a limitation of some sort. We don't know what it is.
And it marks it out from the surrounding terrain, right? It negates the other.
Yeah.
And it's an idea that goes back to Plato, of course, and the Sophists. But okay. We said, actually, okay, we got time.
Yeah, this is it. We got one more paragraph.
I got off. Okay. We set out upon our pursuit of being, and it seemed to us that the series of our questions had led to the heart of being. But behold, at the moment when we thought we were arriving at the goal, a glance cast on the question itself revealed to us suddenly that we have about 630 more pages to go. Sorry. Revealed to us suddenly that we are encompassed with nothingness. The permanent possibility of non-being outside of us and within conditions our questions about being. Furthermore, it is non-being which is going to limit the reply. What being will be must of necessity arise on the basis of what it is not. Whatever being is, it will allow this formulation, quote, being is that, and outside of that, nothing, unquote.
Yeah, this seems to just be exactly what you were just saying about the Hegelian interpretation of limitation as finitude. Thus, a new component of the real has just appeared to us, non-being. Our problem is thereby complicated, for we may no longer limit our inquiry to the relations of the human world to being in itself, but must include of the human being to being in itself, but must also include the relations of being with non-being, and the relations of human non-being with transcendent being. But let us consider further next time in part 2.
Cliffhanger. Yes, I'm very curious. I'm very curious because I'm very confused at this point. So I'm more confused than I thought I would be. So it's interesting, but yeah.
So I'm going to go back before we record the next one. And I see that in 2011, I recorded this close reading on Sartre's Being and Nothingness, section 1. And I'm pretty sure that was not on this section 1. I think it was the intro section 1. So I will confirm that. And then I'm going to actually read the rest of or at least skim the rest of the introduction and see, is it okay for us to proceed as we've been proceeding, or should we just actually go and read the introduction?
Yeah, okay, I'll do the same thing.
All right.
Yeah, it's funny with subtext. I'm listening to episodes maybe just like a month later, and I've already forgotten. It's like listening to someone else talk. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of that. I never thought of that. Listening to myself talk and say these things. Yeah.
Well, the background of this is, we didn't have a reading picked out. This is the second one we're doing this week because you're going on vacation and we're not going to record next week. So we just needed something quickly. And this is the thing that I'm starting to teach. In fact, I told my students, start here on the page we started at. And now I have about 2 days to decide, I already put to the students, maybe you better skim the preface, but I might just have to say, just read the preface or read the preface instead of this because you won't get to this.
Yeah.
It's difficult in that class given that we're picking these giant books, but we have the same problem on here. Bye everybody. See you next time.